Imagine a world where machine learning unlocks the mysteries of drug development, where advanced algorithms sift through big data to perfect clinical trials, and where your health diagnosis is more precise than ever. Welcome to the new frontier. You're tuning in to Artificial Intelligence in Healthcare, the Intelligence Roundtable. I'm your host, Doug Nissinoff from Intelligence Ventures. Our mission is to cultivate the bleeding edge of innovation in AI in healthcare right here in the United States. Dive in with us as AI has finally achieved critical mass. Get a front row seat to the transformative movements. We're bringing together industry leaders and technological pioneers to redefine the impact of AI in healthcare. The future is now. Are you ready? Hello, everyone, and welcome to the inaugural episode of the Intelligence Roundtable, the podcast that takes you deep into the intersection of artificial intelligence and healthcare. I'm your host, Doug Nissinoff, Managing Director and Founder of Intelligence Ventures. For those new to Intelligence Ventures, let me give you a quick background. We are an emerging venture capital firm committed to strategic investment in pre-seed, seed, and Series A companies. Our core mission is to fuel growth and foster the next generation of industry leaders at the crossroads of AI and healthcare. Our initial fund, AI Health Fund 1, focuses on breakthrough technologies that use AI to revolutionize drug development, clinical trials, and patient treatment across various sectors like biotech, pharma, medtech, and diagnostics. Since our formation, in February, we've hit the ground running. We've engaged with over 100 startups that align with our investment thesis, collaborated with over 80 fellow investors, including venture capitalists, angel investors, and family offices. Our core team has expanded to 6 dedicated individuals. And on top of that, we have an outstanding advisory board, and we regularly share industry insights through our LinkedIn-based newsletter series, The Intelligence Report. Today, we're incredibly excited to introduce you to one of our esteemed advisory board members, José Pedro Almeida. José Pedro is nothing short of a luminary in the field of AI-driven healthcare. He's a global AI health data executive, and he's pioneered the world's top clinical big data and AI platform and brings a wealth of experience and insight to the table. But before we dive into that fascinating conversation, let's set the stage for what you can expect from the Intelligence Roundtable. Each episode, we will bring you candid conversations with industry leaders, cutting-edge innovators, and investment experts to uncover the trends, challenges, and opportunities shaping the future of healthcare and AI. So, if you're an entrepreneur, investor, healthcare professional, or simply someone who's interested in the monumental changes AI is bringing to healthcare, this podcast is for you. All right, so let's dive in. José Pedro, welcome to the Intelligence Roundtable.
Pleasure to be here, Doug. Let's do this.
Very excited. So for everyone who's listening in, maybe you can tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Yeah, sure. So 15 years career leading data, AI, big data in machine learning in healthcare. All from AI and big data applied to clinical practice for 10 years, where together with my team, we've built some of the most globally recognized big data and AI platforms globally that were helping not only manage one of the largest hospital groups in Portugal, but also advise doctors and nurses in a lot of clinical events where being more proactively with insights could make the difference into patient care. And afterwards, also led the data intelligence area in Portugal for one of the largest diagnostics groups in Europe. And was also a fascinating experience and where I learned a lot. More closely related to also health retail, which is also fascinating.
So you've been pretty busy. And you've really gotten to see a lot of the changes that have come with AI through the years. And so maybe can you set the stage for us by describing the current landscape of healthcare and where you see opportunities for AI to step in?
Well, I think we are at an inflection point in time. It's really an unprecedented moment where, we were going through this AI winter where more or less there were not many progresses in terms of AI and AI in healthcare, more concretely. But nowadays we have just seen a technology that is being applied globally. It's highly democratized. It's evolving, in 6 months faster than any other technology has evolved in 12 years, which are these large language models, or more broadly, this generative AI technology that is powering things like ChatGPT. And what I see is a completely new way of seeing a technology applied to any business, and concretely in healthcare. These things, these models, these large neural networks are able to ingest, process, and resonate on top of a multidimensional and multimodal layer of data that was impossible to do before with the traditional way of doing AI. It would take you some projects more than 2 years, a data science team, and at the end of that time, you were only having a model that was highly specialized in doing one single thing. And now these models are able to analyze a vast broad of data from all formats, from text to images to sound, and are able to build a representation of the clinical world that afterwards allows these models to act upon several tasks and not only one. And that is highly powerful for the world of healthcare and mostly any business.
It's super interesting. It seems that healthcare is one of the industries that, while it's typically slow to adapt to new technologies, it actually seems to be embracing AI with open arms. So maybe it'd be helpful to understand your perspective. Can you share some specific examples where you've successfully applied AI to solve pressing healthcare issues in large hospitals?
Yeah, I think before that, we need to understand that there are some foundations that need to be set up and put in place. One of those foundations is really having a data platform, especially in large healthcare organizations, where all the data is spread out in different silos, and it's really hard to grab those data silos and bring them into a centralized place in an automated fashion. So you need to invest in that layer. You need to invest in a team that knows how to do and how to build this thing. And afterwards, what you do is starting to build intelligence models on top of that. So one of my past experiences was building a large big data model that was analyzing data from dozens of different hospital systems, from lab results to pharmacy to HR, even the floor plans. We were capturing that data. And then we were building a multidimensional view, which is like an abstraction layer, an intelligence layer of what was happening inside the hospital. And to give you a sense of the size, that structure was processing per day 560 billion answers, which means that if anyone in the hospital wanted to know something that was going on, the platform would just answer in a flash of a second. We called it back then the magical data cube, because it was based on another technology, but the reasoning is the same as we have today. And so that structure and that hospital was so advanced in this forefront that the doctor could be walking down the second floor to see a patient and receive a text message in his mobile phone from our AI agents, signaling that there was a patient, for instance, in the 9th floor with his heart rate going up, blood pressure going down. So looking at all these signals and crawling all the other systems to understand that same patient at that same time could have a life-threatening potassium level because a lab result had just came out. And so by understanding all that was happening in a much faster way, at scale, for more than 1,000 beds, 24/7, you can inform doctors and nurses proactively of what is happening in the field. And we've just seen, a lot of improvements in terms of the way we were providing care back then. Also, helping to drop hospital-acquired infections by better signaling patients that were infected with these superbugs, these multi-drug resistant bacteria. And we were doing that because we built those foundations. We built that, we might call it crystal ball. And what we see nowadays with these large language models are these crystal balls. And these structures were able to signal much faster what was happening and alert physicians for it. And I think that's highly valuable for healthcare. And I think the future is moving that way. So at scale and reducing time to action.
That's incredible. And I'd imagine it requires such a multidisciplinary team to really be able to understand both sides of the coin, right? You have the folks who really understand the data and how to work with it, but then you also have the clinicians, right? The doctors and the nursing staff. How have you, I'm sure, and they speak different languages, if you will. How do you bridge that gap?
Well, it's quite complex firsthand, but I think we need to see this as two sides of the equation. The first one is really the organical framework that you put in place. So the organization needs to have a department that's connected to the CEO from my perspective, and that is highly visible and empowered inside the organization, because this sends a message to the organization that data and AI will be the next thing, and that's leaders from the C-suite are all in on this transformation, and that message spreads out not only to the technical teams but also to clinicians, because they start wanting to make themselves part of this journey. And then you just build multidisciplinary teams. You hire talent, and when I say you hire talent, it's not just software engineers. You need to hire talent from AI. You need to hire talent, for instance, in my team, biomedical engineers that are really these smart people that know about technology, but also know how to speak with doctors and nurses. And this is really important because these things are built as a team together, because doctors and nurses bring us their clinical knowledge, and they start to understand also what technology is able to do. And so when you are able to set this framework, and this framework sometimes in this large organization takes years, but when you start sending those alerts about patients at risk, they started seeing the value of what was built together. What happens next is that they start bringing you other clinical problems. For instance, one of the clinical problems I remember well was analyzing all that big data that was in unstructured notes. Back then, we only had an area of AI which is called natural language processing, but it's really similar to what these language models do nowadays. And basically what we did was a research project where we analyzed all the clinical notes in an anonymized way, but we were able to produce a summary of a patient, of everything that happened inside the hospital in a flash of a second. And that can be highly valuable for patient care, because you can find out in a second that there was an allergy to a certain medication that was written maybe 10 years ago, and that probably the doctor wouldn't have time to go through all the episodes of that patient. And by having a system that automatically signals that to him, you can imagine that you will want this. You will want to be part of this transformation.
Yeah. We're seeing quite a few startups that we're meeting with and are applying for funding through intelligence ventures that are playing in that field. And it's interesting to see the founders that come out of it. They range quite broadly. They're anything from physicians who were looking for better solutions to very data focused folks to I've even met folks who they're PhDs or MDs who had enough and they couldn't figure out how to bridge that gap, and they taught themselves how to code. It's quite incredible. And I think a lot of the clinical applications we're seeing are generative AI based. That seems to be hot right now. And you mentioned like generative AI coming out, like ChatGPT came back in, I think it was like January or maybe November or December, something like that, and quickly acquired over 100 million users. I think it was a record, maybe within 2 or 3 months. And so Maybe you can talk for our listeners who may not be familiar. Can you explain what Gen AI is and how it differentiates from traditional AI models?
Sure. So basically, trying to be really basic in terms of the explanation, I would say that nowadays we need to see each patient as a vector. And what that means is that what these models do, and they do the same way on top of text or images or any other kind of data, is that they, slice data into certain pieces, and they produce these vectors that are called their embeddings, which are like an abstraction layer, a representation of what that data means, and they basically project this in a high dimensional space. And so they start to understand in an unsupervised way concepts that are really close together. Like they might understand, for instance, by reading all the clinical notes of a hospital, that fever is close to antibiotics, without no one ever having taught that to the model. And so previously, the traditional way of doing things in AI is that you had a model, you had to train that model for a specific task. For instance, finding a long nodule in a CT scan. So you had patients with long nodules, patients without long nodules. You will have to classify each of these types of images, and you will train a model for months just to do this task. The difference nowadays is that these multimodal models that are coming up, so it's not only these LLMs, this Gen AI, is the things that are these emergent behaviors that we are starting to see, which is the same model is able to go through images and text, for instance. And that is a game changer, because that old traditional AI model that was just finding out lung nodules and just looking at the image was quite dumb, because he was not seeing, for instance, the clinical history of that patient, the pathology reports of that patient, the blood results of that patient. But nowadays, with these much more powerful models, they can run through all this data to produce an inference. And that's an inflection point in technology. And I believe it's the next electricity, the next operating system of any healthcare organization.
Yeah. And I love that you use that phrase, operating system for healthcare organizations. It perfectly encapsulates what's going on, right? You don't see anybody using Windows 97 anymore. And if there's anyone who is out there listening to this, I applaud you. That's awesome that you are using Windows 97. But with healthcare, there's a need for improvements in the infrastructure consistently. So, what makes the healthcare industry's operating system so distinct that tech transformations face hurdles?
Well, we need to understand that this is an high stakes business, is highly critical. You cannot simply stop an hospital and change all the systems. You cannot do this. You have patients in the front door getting in every day. And so it's quite hard to do that transformation. There's also a piece of history which is decades ago, sometimes each clinical department was buying their own systems, because also the IT took quite long to get into these healthcare organizations. And so those data silos were created. Then this is a critical business, high stakes. And so nobody wants to change. The workforce is getting lower, so they don't have time. They don't want to learn a new system. And so if you try to change the operating system of healthcare from that front, it will take you decades. And so I believe that you need to build something sideways. And I think these models will be the solution, where you pull up all the data to a separate place and you build from there. You connect doctors and nurses to that separate place. When it starts bringing more value than you have today in your own system. For instance, if that separate agent is able to talk to you about everything that went through an episode of a certain patient that you don't know in a flash of a second, probably you don't need to go to that old IT system, run through all those notes to understand, to have a clear picture, a bird's eye view of what was happening with the patient. And so I think as we are moving along, doctors will be using this digital representation of the business that these large language models will be able to produce without impacting the operational systems that already exist.
Yeah. And, we're seeing quite a few physicians many actually, who are adopting this technology, and it's fascinating to see. One thing that seems to be a consistent problem that there's been buzz around is the credibility gap when it comes to AI in healthcare, especially amongst clinicians. I'll give you an example. There have been times where I've used ChatGPT to do work, and I will say, okay, interesting, cite the source. And it'll cite a source. And then I'll say, try to look for it online, and it doesn't exist. It just cited something that it pulled out of thin air almost. And I'll say, is this real? And I'll say, I'm sorry, I made a mistake. So I think this is called the black box effect, and you probably know more about this than I do. But how have you been able to build trust for healthcare systems and all that? And what do you think tech companies are getting wrong?
Well, once again, the way I've been able to build trust is by building together. And when you build together with clinicians, you define certain operating limits where the AI will act and will help, and where the AI will never act. And so I can say right away that I wouldn't want to have an AI diagnosing patients because you will probably do harm to patients, because these models at the end of the day are just mathematics, and if you don't have that sense, they don't have common sense, they don't have sometimes the broader picture of a patient. And what I see tech companies doing is approaching healthcare in quite a naive way. They have never worked with a doctor. They think this is like building Uber for consumers. It is not. They need to understand how complex the medical reasoning is. They need to understand that there are some parts of the medical reasoning that are like a magical art that you need to respect. And you need to go into healthcare from the back office to the point of care. And what I mean by that is that you need to build solutions in terms of the way you approach with AI that go after problems that won't cause any harm to patients. And I can give you an example. So you can have an LLM calling patients before their visit that is scheduled to the hospital, when that happens, just to obtain more variables from that patient, so that when that visit occurs, the doctor has already variables from and insights from the patient in terms of what happened when he was outside the hospital. That won't cause any harm because the patient will be there physically in the moment of the outpatient visit. But the scale you can get with this is much greater than exists today. So I think that is the right mindset in terms of how you approach healthcare with AI, and that tech companies have been quite naive. And also, just to finish, they also need to make doctors and nurses' life easier. That means that the way they integrate the technology into the operating system of healthcare needs to be so simple that they cannot ignore it. So if they have to log in into another system, learn a new language or anything like that, that will never work because they don't have the time.
I agree wholeheartedly with that. We've seen a few different startups that come out with great products, and they're usually more technically minded, and they don't really think about the clinician standpoint. And one of the questions we always ask them when we first meet with them is, are the doctors actually going to use this? And in their heads, the answer is always yes, right? But like you said, physicians are already busy and overworked and tired, nursing staff too, the whole 9 yards. So do they really want to remember a new login, a new password, and then figure out how to use new software? Or do they want something that's already integrated into their workflows? And as you say, it's so simple, they can't ignore it.
But
And
Doug, let me just head up to this. which is I also see these startups, as you know, as well, selling the hype of AI. Like any slide of any startup nowadays has AI into it. That is not the point. The
Yep.
point is really if it solves a clinical problem. And the way to know if it solves a clinical problem is getting the solution into the field and doing the work, that hard work of being together side by side with the clinicians, making them use, understanding why don't they use it. And if something works after months of iterations, if they use it every day, that's because they need it. I don't care if it has AI or not. What matters if it has an impact into patient care, and that's what makes the difference.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And as you said, they need to keep the Hippocratic Oath in mind, which is do no harm.
Yeah,
And
that's it.
maybe can you give us a glimpse into the technical and organizational infrastructure that's needed for a successful AI transformation?
Sure. So I think the first thing, if I had to bet, is the organizational framework in terms of people, in terms of where do you position this space in terms of all your departments and C-suite. And from my perspective, this needs to be something that sits at the table. You need a different skill set from where you had 10 years ago that were just management people, financial people in the C-suite. But nowadays you need a new profile, and that profile is someone that understands AI deeply, understands data deeply, understands digital deeply, and that needs to be empowered by the C-suite, because there will be so many blockages along the way, and so many roads to clear from everyone, because no one wants transformation at the end of the day. Starting, sometimes from the IT to some, clinical departments that have that old school mindset, and you need to clear the road, and you need, and so that framework in terms of culture of the organization needs to start from the top. And afterwards, the technology framework that I believe is you need to build a separate layer that really separates data from IT. So IT is worried about running the operational systems, cybersecurity, resilience, doctors working with their systems. And then there's this abstraction / intelligence layer / data platform where you pull the data to a separate place and you build these models on top of that. And before we were just pulling, mostly structured data from databases. But now these models can pull data from all text, images, sound that exists. And when you build this abstraction layer, you can simply query that layer in a natural language way. And you can build so powerful things like asking in a natural language way for the whole hospital, where are my patients that are not following clinical guidelines? And so the network, the model, is able to run through all the clinical notes of all the patients, cross those notes with the clinical guidelines that should be followed, that are also in text, and in an automated way bring you the patients where there's something that is not going according to the clinical guidelines that you want to put in place in the organization. And so when you have a technology that is able to understand in an automated way what is written in those texts, and it can be written in hundreds of different ways, and flag you situations that are not correct, you can standardize the level of care and really make everyone perform at the top of their license, young doctors, senior doctors, nurses, everyone. And so I think we will see a level of healthcare where efficiency and safety scales to an unprecedented way.
Very interesting. And earlier you mentioned that a senior individual is pretty much needed to really, who deeply understands artificial intelligence and the integration. What does training for that type of person look like? And are there enough of them to go around? Or is there something needed where we can teach the next generation to really be performing with the next operating system for healthcare?
Well, I think particularly in healthcare, having a knowledge from the business is absolutely crucial. So having been there, working with doctors and nurses for several years is really important because it goes from that naive vision of only being from the outside tech world. You go into the inside thinking that you understand the process of treating a patient, and you don't. So that would be my first priority. But afterwards, I think we will see those profiles coming out not only from tech, but probably one day you will see a doctor that understands AI. And the reason being is that this technology is much more democratized than the traditional way of doing AI, where you have all that feature engineering pipeline. You had to know all the models in detail, the mathematics that were running behind and all that. And nowadays, it's not as simple, but mostly you need to know how do you prompt a model. So how do you make the model react in terms of what you want the model to do, and that is what we call the prompt engineering phase, and that is done in a natural language way. So I believe that almost all profiles will be able, if they dedicate themselves, to be specialized in AI.
Wow. Okay, that makes a lot of sense what you're saying. And for the last question for this episode, so can you maybe give us a glimpse into the future? How do you envision the future of AI in transforming hospitals and patient care, and what does that mean for consumers?
Well, in terms of hospitals, I think we will see a tectonic shift in terms of the way doctors and nurses interact with patients through a PC. And what I mean by that is that, when Windows came along, it was a disruption. Then came the electronic patient record. Doctors and nurses always writing in the PC. And I think the UX will change. And I don't know if it will take 5 to 10 years, but you will no longer see a PC inside a hospital. And clinicians will fully dedicate themselves into patient care, talking to patients, treating the patients, and then there will be an entity that will be listening to everything that's happening inside the ward, inside the doctor's office, and it will be going back and forth to the systems, picking up and analyzing lab results and finding the insights from it, medications, bringing the medical image almost already with an insight on top of that medical image. And so that level of automation that we call these AI agents that these LLMs can provide will allow the doctor to spend much more time with the patient, looking at him, talking to him, than it nowadays spends writing in the computer. And secondly, in terms of the consumers, of the patients, what we will see, and I'm quite sure of that because of the trends that are happening, we will see each and any one of us having a personal AI assistant for their healthcare. Just think of this as like the Google Maps of our lives. These models will be personalized. We will have them in our phone. They are already happening, so it's not science fiction. And they will be able to ingest all our clinical data, translate that data of clinical jargon into a much more simple way. But they will also help us as patients in our lives. Like you can imagine a chronic patient that has to take several medications. He will have a personalized LLM that will run through all the interactions of all the drugs he is taking to find out if there's a problem with a certain medication being taken at the same time of another. I just give you an example, like taking aspirin and enoxaparin at the same time, which are both blood thinners. The patient can get into a severe problem if he takes both at the same time in certain doses. But those AI assistants will help us arrive at the doctor's office much more informed, but also much more proactively, which means that we will know problems about our health that we don't know today because we are not able to interpret our our lab results, our medical image, and so we will arrive much sooner at the doctor's office because we will have our personalized AI agent running through our clinical data and informing us that we need to go to the doctor.
Wow. The future of healthcare looks extremely bright.
Let's hope so.
Yeah. Well, as we wrap up today's insightful conversation with Jose Pedro, I want to extend a heartfelt thank you to him for taking the time to share his expertise and insights. And of course, thank you to all of you for tuning in to this inaugural episode of the Intelligence Roundtable. It's clear that the intersection of artificial intelligence and healthcare is a dynamic and rapidly evolving landscape. With each episode, we aim to bring you the leaders and thinkers who are not just observing these changes, but are actively shaping them. If you found value in today's episode, I'd like to invite you to subscribe to the Intelligence Roundtable on your preferred podcast platform and join our LinkedIn community where we share industry updates through the Intelligence Report, our newsletter series. Now, a little teaser for our next episode. We're continuing our series with our world-class advisory board members. Trust me, you won't want to miss it. We have another visionary in the field lined up who will shed light on the intersection of AI and healthcare. It's going to be a fascinating dive, so be sure to tune in. From all of us at Intelligence Ventures, thank you for spending your time with us today. Until the next roundtable, keep innovating, keep investing, and keep pushing the boundaries of what's possible in healthcare.